There are loves that bloom slowly, like a seed cracking the damp earth, taking weeks to reach the sun. There are hearts that were never taught to trust, and men who fear their own strength because they don't know how to be gentle. This is the story of two wounded souls who found each other on a remote farm, where the silence of the land taught what no words could. That true love isn't learned. It just happens when two weary hearts finally find their rest. Subscribe to the channel for heartwarming stories every day. The farm woke up the same way every morning, with the low moo of the dairy cows, the shrill crow of the roosters, and the creak of the wooden gate that had never been fixed. Tomas knew each sound like he knew his own breath. He'd get up before dawn, pull on his worn boots, make black coffee, and head out to the work that never ended. The fields stretched green and rolling as far as the eye could see, cut here and there by barbed wire fences and crooked fence posts. The creek ran gently along the eastern boundary, and the house, large, old, with whitewashed walls and a red-tiled roof, sat atop a gentle hill, as if keeping watch over everything. Tomas was 42, his shoulders broad from carrying burdens, his hands calloused from gripping a plow. He'd lost his wife to a sudden fever years ago, and since then, he lived only to keep the land alive. He no longer knew how to smile. He no longer knew how to dream. He'd wake, he'd work, he'd eat little, and he'd sleep poorly. The farm was his silent companion, and he'd accepted that this was his fate, to tend the land until the land covered him. But the loneliness weighed on him. It weighed in the cup of coffee he drank alone at the long kitchen table. It weighed in the silence of the night, when the wind rattled the shutters and no one answered. It weighed in the empty room next to his, where the wooden crib still waited for a child that never came. He kept all of it locked inside his chest, like the ashes of an old fire. On the same day Tomas was mending the fence on the south pasture, Laura walked down the dirt road with a cloth bag slung over her shoulder, her shoes covered in red dust. She was 27, but her eyes looked older, deep brown eyes that held a quiet sadness. She came from far away, from a life that didn't deserve to be called home. She'd grown up being treated as a burden, then as a servant, then as nothing. She'd learned to walk softly, to speak quietly, to disappear when necessary. She'd never known affection. She'd never been touched with tenderness. She believed deep down that she had no value, that she was just another mouth to feed, another body taking up space in the world. She'd run away one moonless dawn, taking only what she needed. She didn't know where to go. She just walked. And so it was, exhausted and aimless, that she spotted the gate of Saint Sebastian farm at dusk. She stopped before it, hugging herself as if asking permission to exist, and wondered if she'd have the courage to knock. Tomas saw the woman from a distance, a small silhouette against the orange glow of the late afternoon sun. He dropped his hammer, wiped the sweat from his brow, and walked towards the gate. She was trembling, though it wasn't that cold. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice deep and tired. Laura looked up, startled. He was big, imposing, but there was something in his sun-weathered face that didn't inspire fear. I was looking for work. Anything. I can cook, clean, tend the garden." Her voice was a whisper, almost inaudible. Tomas watched her in silence. He saw the worn bag, the torn shoes, the shame in the way she averted her gaze. And he saw something else, a pain that was like his own. "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" he asked directly. She shook her head, her lips pressed tight. Tomas sighed. He wasn't a man to open doors easily, but he wasn't a man to leave someone out in the cold either. "There's a room out back, small but clean. You can stay for tonight. We'll talk tomorrow." Laura looked up, incredulous. For the first time in a long time, no one had shooed her away. "Thank you," she whispered, and the word came out so heavy with emotion that Tomas had to turn his head. He opened the gate and walked ahead, not looking back. She followed in silence, stepping slowly on the tall grass, as if afraid of breaking something sacred. The house smelled of old wood and reheated coffee. Laura entered the kitchen and saw the large table, the cast-iron pots hanging from hooks, the open window overlooking the orchard. Tomas pointed to a narrow hallway. "The room is down there. There are clean sheets in the dresser. I'll knock on your door first thing in the morning." She nodded, holding her bag tight. Before he left, she gathered her courage. "You don't know me. Why did you let me in?" Tomas stopped at the doorway. He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, it was almost to himself, "Because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go." And he left, leaving Laura alone in the silent kitchen, her heart aching and her eyes brimming with tears. That night, for the first time in years, she slept without fear, and he, lying in the room next door, stayed awake long past midnight, wondering why that stranger had reminded him that he was still human. Laura woke to the crowing of roosters and the smell of damp earth drifting through the window. She got up slowly, still unaccustomed to the feeling of safety. She put on the same clothes as the day before, combed her hair with her fingers, and went out to the kitchen. Tomas was already there, making coffee. He turned when he heard her and nodded. "Morning." "Morning," she replied softly. He poured 2 cups, put bread on the table, and sat down without ceremony. Laura hesitated before sitting, as if still expecting to be told to leave. "You can eat," Tomas said, pushing the plate towards her. She ate slowly in silence. The coffee was strong, the bread still warm. It was simple, but it was more than she'd had in weeks. When they finished, Tomas cleared his throat. "If you want to stay, you can work here. Nothing too heavy. Cooking, the garden, looking after the house. I'll pay what we agreed and give you food and a roof over your head. But let's be clear, this is an honest place, hard work, but no one raises their voice and no one raises their hand." "Understood." Laura felt her chest tighten. She nodded, unable to speak. "Then it's a deal." And so it began. In the first few days, Laura moved through the house like a ghost, silent, efficient, almost invisible. She cleaned, she cooked, she tended the garden with gentle hands. Tomas barely saw her, busy with the livestock and endless repairs. But he noticed the small signs: the tidier kitchen, the smell of stew in the late afternoon, the clean laundry drying on the line. She worked as if apologizing for her existence. She never complained. She never asked for anything. She ate little and spoke even less. One night, a storm broke over the farm. The wind rattled the windows, rain hammered the roof, and thunder boomed like cannon fire. Laura, sleeping in the back bedroom, woke with a start. She got up trembling, wrapped herself in a thin shawl, and stepped out onto the porch, trying to calm her racing heart. That's when lightning split the sky. So close she screamed and recoiled, stumbling over her own feet. Tom came running out of the house when he heard her cry. He found her leaning against the wall, eyes wide, body shaking. "It's all right," he said, his voice firm but not harsh. "Just a storm. It'll pass soon." But she couldn't stop shaking. Tom hesitated, then took off the wool jacket he was wearing and held it out to her. "Put this on. It's cold." Laura looked at the jacket, then at him. Slowly she took it and put it on. It was too big, smelled of wood smoke and honest sweat. But it was warm, and it had been offered with kindness. "Thank you," she murmured. Tom nodded, looked away, and went back inside. But that night, lying in bed, he couldn't shake the image of her trembling on the porch. So small, so lost. And Laura, wrapped in his jacket, felt for the first time in years that someone cared. In the days that followed, something shifted between them. It wasn't friendship yet, just a mutual awareness that they weren't entirely alone anymore. Tom started noticing small details: the way she hummed softly while kneading dough, the care with which she watered the tomato seedlings, the way she avoided his gaze. and Laura began to see that he wasn't the gruff man he seemed. There was a hidden gentleness in how he'd leave wildflowers on the kitchen windowsill without a word, in the care he took fixing the chair she sat in the patience with which he waited for her to finish speaking on the rare occasions she gathered the courage. But they both carried wounds too old to open easily, and so they continued side by side, each locked in their own silence, waiting for time to do what words could not. The weeks passed slowly, marked by the eternal rhythm of the farm: plant, harvest, mend, begin again. Laura adapted to the farm routine with an ease that surprised Tom. She woke early, made coffee, tended the garden, washed clothes in the stone sink, and cooked simple but hearty meals. Tom, for his part, worked from dawn till dusk, but he started coming home in the mid-afternoon, something he'd never done before. He told himself it was to check that everything was in order. But the truth was, he liked finding Laura in the kitchen, apron dusted with flour, face flushed from the stove's heat. They spoke little, but there was a strange peace in their shared silence. It was on a sweltering afternoon, while Laura was hanging sheets on the line, that the first barrier began to crack. Tom came home earlier than usual, sweaty and tired. He sat on the porch and accepted the glass of cool water she offered him. Laura stood beside him, wringing her hands. "Can I ask something?" she said, hesitant. Tom looked up. "You can. Why do you live alone? A man like you should have a family." Tom was silent for a long moment. He drank the rest of the water, set the glass aside, and looked towards the horizon. "I did. My wife died 7 years ago. Fever. It took 3 days. Didn't even have time to call the doctor in town." Laura felt her chest tighten. "I'm so sorry." He shrugged, but the weight of his grief was still there, alive. "And you?" Tom asked, turning his face to her. "Why were you walking alone on that road?" Laura felt her blood run cold. She looked away, clasped her hands together. I don't have anyone. I never did. Everyone has someone. I don't." Her voice came out so cold, so final, that Tom didn't press. But he saw the shame she carried, the way she hunched her shoulders as if expecting to be judged. And then he said, his voice grave but gentle, "Here you do, for as long as you want to stay." Laura looked up, surprised. He was already on his feet, heading back to work. But the words echoed within her, hot as embers. The nearest town was 3 miles from the farm, and Tom went there once a month for supplies. This time he took Laura with him. She'd never ridden in a wagon before. She sat beside him, holding tight to the edge of the seat, and watched the landscape pass. Fields of sunflowers, red dirt roads, small houses scattered across the plain. In town, Tom went into the general store and bought flour, sugar, salt, kerosene. Laura waited outside, watching people go by. That's when she heard the voices. "Who's that?" asked a woman in a dark dress, pointing in Laura's direction. "Tom's new hired girl," another replied quietly. "Just showed up out of nowhere, they say. No family, no past. Must have run off from something. A woman alone is never good news. Bet she's got her eye on his land." Laura felt her face burn. She lowered her head, clasped her hands, and wished she could disappear. When Tom came out of the store, he found her pale, trembling. He frowned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she lied, her voice weak. But he saw the shame, the fear, the humiliation, and he felt a dull anger rise within him. "Let's go," he said firmly. On the way back, he broke the silence. "Don't pay any mind to what those folks say. They're small-minded. They gossip because they've got nothing else." Laura looked at him, her eyes welling up. "But they're right. I have nothing. No name, no past. I'm just nothing." Tom pulled hard on the reins, stopping the wagon in the middle of the road. He turned to her, his eyes steady. "You're not nothing. You're someone starting over, and that's worth more than any town gossip. Laura felt tears stream down her face. For the first time in years, someone saw her as a person. "Thank you," she whispered. Tom nodded and urged the wagon on. But something had shifted between them, something subtle but undeniable, and they both knew it. The days that followed brought a new, almost imperceptible routine. Laura continued to care for the house, but Tom began to include her in small farm tasks, not because he needed help, but because he liked having her around. He taught her to milk the cows, holding her trembling hands and guiding them with patience. He showed her how to tell when a hen was broody, how to plant beans at the right moon phase, how to fix a fence without hurting her hands. Laura learned everything with silent attention, her eyes shining with curiosity. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was building something, not just surviving. And Tom, who had been living on autopilot for years, rediscovered the joy of teaching, of watching someone grow by his side. One afternoon, while they were fixing the barn roof, Laura asked, "Did you always live here?" Thomas hammered the last nail before answering. "I was born here. My father inherited this land from his grandfather, and I'll die here." She looked at him, thoughtful. "Don't you miss another life? Traveling, seeing places?" Thomas shrugged. "Land is roots. You can't carry roots around." Laura smiled sadly. "I've never had roots. I've just been carried from one place to another like driftwood in a current." Thomas stopped, got down from the ladder, and stood before her. "Then put down roots here." She looked up, surprised. "Here? Why not? Good soil, a solid house, honest work, and no one's going to tear you away from here." Laura felt her heart leap. She nodded slowly, not trusting her own voice. That night, while preparing dinner, she hummed an old song her mother used to sing. Thomas, sitting at the table mending a bridle, paused to listen. Her voice was soft, almost shy, but it carried a raw beauty. When she finished, he said, "You sing beautifully." Laura blushed, stirring the pot without looking at him. "It's been a while since I've sung. I thought I'd forgotten." "You haven't." She smiled, and it was a genuine smile, the first Thomas had seen since she'd arrived. And he, without realizing it, smiled back. Little by little, the farm stopped being just a place of work. It became a space for healing. Laura started planting flowers in the bed in front of the house, daisies, carnations, pansies. Thomas, who had never cared for such things, began watering the seedlings without being asked. She sewed at night, mending her own clothes and his. Thomas brought fabrics from town, nothing too expensive but nice, and Laura, touched, made new curtains for the living room, embroidered towels for the table. The house, which had been merely functional, began to feel like a home, but the past of both still stalked them. Thomas carried the guilt of not saving his wife. Laura carried the shame of never having been loved, and both feared that if they got too close, the other's pain might destroy them. It was on a drizzly afternoon, while they worked side by side in the vegetable garden, that the symbol appeared. Laura found, buried among the roots of a jabuticaba tree, a piece of blue fabric, old, faded, but still whole. She picked it up, shook off the dirt, and held it to the light. "What is that?" Thomas asked. "I don't know. Looks like a scrap of a dress." He frowned. "Must be my mother's. She used to sew here under the tree." Laura ran her fingers over the fabric. "Oh, thoughtful. Can I keep it?" Thomas nodded, and Laura put the blue fabric in her apron pocket, like someone guarding a promise. That night, as the rain drummed on the roof, Laura cut the fabric into strips and began making a quilt. Each piece was a memory, a hope, a beginning. And Thomas, watching her sew by lamplight, felt something dangerous awaken within him, something he no longer knew how to control. Autumn arrived slowly, painting the fields gold and bringing colder nights. Laura finished the patchwork quilt and placed it on the bed, a simple coverlet made from scraps, but carrying hours of care and hope. Tomas, seeing it, fell silent. Then he simply said, "It's beautiful." And Laura, expecting more, smiled sadly and thanked him. But the fragile peace they had built was shaken one morning of biting wind. Tomas was in the north pasture, fixing a gate, when his horse spooked at a snake and kicked violently. He tried to get away, but the hoof struck his left leg with brutal force. The pain was immediate, blinding. Tomas fell to his knees, his face pale, his breath caught. He tried to get up, but his leg wouldn't obey. It was Laura who found him, half an hour later, still lying in the wet grass. "Tomas!" she cried, running to him. "I'm fine," he lied, his voice hoarse with pain. "No, you're not. You can't even stand up." She knelt beside him, her hands trembling. His leg was swollen, his pants stained with blood. Laura took a deep breath, trying to control her panic. "I'll get you home. Lean on me." Tomas was big, heavy, but Laura was determined. With superhuman effort, she managed to lift him and, putting his arm over her shoulders, dragged him slowly to the house. The walk was agonizing. Tomas moaned softly with each step, but he didn't complain, and Laura, sweating and trembling, didn't stop even once. When they finally reached the house, she laid him on the bed, took off his boots, and examined his leg carefully. The wound was ugly, a deep cut above the knee, already starting to swell. Laura ran to the kitchen, boiled water, got clean cloths, and returned to the room. She washed the wound gently, disinfected it with brandy. Tomas gritted his teeth but didn't cry out, and bandaged the leg firmly. "You need a doctor," she said, serious. "I don't." "Yes, you do. It could get infected. I don't have money for a doctor right now." Laura pursed her lips, furious and helpless. But she didn't argue. Instead, she stayed by his side, watching over him, changing the dressings, giving him water and warm soup. For 3 days, Tomas had a fever. He raved at night, calling out names Laura didn't know. She didn't sleep. She stayed awake, applying cool cloths to his forehead, holding his hand when the tremors came. On the 3rd night, when the fever finally broke, Tomas opened his eyes and found Laura sitting beside the bed, her face pale with exhaustion, her eyes red. "You stayed here the whole time?" he asked, his voice weak. "Where else would I go?" Tomas felt his chest tighten. He extended his hand hesitantly. Laura took it, and he squeezed back, firmly, gratefully, emotionally. "Thank you." Laura shook her head, her eyes welling up. "You don't need to thank me. You did the same for me." But Tomas knew it wasn't the same. She had saved him not out of obligation, but by choice, by care, by something he didn't dare name. And in that moment, something inside him broke, not from pain, but from gratitude, tenderness, an old and dangerous feeling he'd been trying to smother for weeks. But he couldn't anymore. When Laura got up to get more water, Tomas held her hand tighter. "Stay," he asked softly, and she stayed. She sat beside him, her hand still clasped in his, and they remained there until dawn, 2 lonely souls who for the first time didn't feel alone. But out there, in town, tongues continued to wag, and the storm was just beginning. Tomas recovered slowly. His leg still ached, but he was too stubborn to stay in bed. He returned to work, limping against Laura's orders, which she reprimanded him with a firmness he found endearing. Something had changed between them after those 3 nights. They talked more, they laughed sometimes, and they looked at each other in a way neither of them knew quite how to interpret. Laura realized she thought about him constantly, the way his brow furrowed when he was concentrating, the restrained strength in his hands, the kindness he tried to hide behind his silences. And it scared her, because she'd never learned how to be loved, and she didn't know what to do with what she felt. Tomas, for his part, fought against the growing desire to touch her, not carnally but tenderly. He wanted to cup her face, brush the hair from her forehead, tell her she was beautiful. But he was afraid. afraid of startling her, afraid of breaking the fragile peace they had built. It was on an afternoon with an orange sky, the scent of wet grass rising from the freshly watered earth, that everything changed. They were on the porch, resting after a hard day's work. The sun was dipping slowly behind the mountains, painting the fields in gold and red. Laura was sitting on the steps, arms wrapped around her knees, her gaze lost on the horizon. Tomas was leaning against a wooden post a few feet away, and without either of them quite knowing how, they started to talk. "Have you ever been happy?" Laura asked suddenly. Tomas thought before answering. "I was, when my wife was alive, before the fever. And after, I forgot what it was like." Laura nodded slowly. "I've never been happy, not before, not after. I never knew what it was like." Tomas turned to her, his chest tight. "One day you will know." Laura let out a sad laugh. "I don't know. I don't know how to do anything right. I don't know how to be—" She stopped, bit her lip. "I don't know how to make love." The words came out so low, so soft, they were almost lost in the wind. But Tomas heard, and it was as if he'd been struck by lightning. He froze, his whole body tense, his breath caught, his heart pounded. There was no malice in Laura's confession, only shame, innocence, and a deep fear of not knowing how to be loved. But the words hit Tomas with devastating force, because he, who had been trying to suppress what he felt for weeks, exploded inside, not with anger, but with desire. Not the empty, carnal desire he'd known in his youth, but something older, deeper. An overwhelming urge to take her in his arms, to show her she was worth everything, to teach her with his body and soul that she was worthy of being loved. The intensity of what he felt completely destabilized him. He turned his face away, struggling to breathe, his hands clenched into fists. He didn't trust himself. He didn't trust his own strength. Laura, confused, sensed the shift in the air. She saw the tension in his body, his ragged breathing. "I'm sorry," she murmured, startled. "I shouldn't have said that." Tomas closed his eyes, his voice coming out rough, almost a contained growl. "Don't say that. Never say that again." She recoiled, her heart pounding. "Why?" He turned back to her, his eyes dark and intense, filled with something she couldn't name. "Because you don't know what you're doing to me. You don't know—" He stopped, took a deep breath, trying to control himself. "You just haven't met someone who treated you with truth, but you do know. You know more than you think." Laura felt tears welling up. She didn't understand. She didn't understand what he meant or what was happening. Tomas ran a hand over his face, exhausted, and took a step back. I need to go check on the cattle." And he left, quickly, before he did something he might regret. Laura remained alone on the porch, her heart aching, confused and scared. Because, for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her as if she mattered, as if she was worth something. And she didn't know if that freed her or terrified her. After that afternoon, Tomas pulled away. Not abruptly, but steadily. He threw himself into his work with almost violent intensity, leaving before dawn and returning only after night had fallen. He ate in silence, avoided Laura's gaze, and slept in the barn, saying he needed to watch over the pregnant cows. Laura didn't understand. She replayed the scene on the porch 1,000 times, trying to decipher where she had gone wrong. Had she said something wrong, done something that offended him? Shame consumed her, and fear, the fear that he would send her away, that everything would go back to how it was. She tried to approach him once. She brought him coffee in the field, the cup warm in her trembling hands. He thanked her, but didn't meet her eyes. And when she started to say something, he interrupted her with a dry, almost cruel, "I have a lot of work to do, Laura." She returned home with tear-filled eyes, feeling small and useless again. The days dragged on, heavy. The house, which had become a home, was once again just a place. Laura cooked, cleaned, tended the garden. But she did it all on autopilot without joy, and Tomas, locked in his own guilt and fear, suffered in silence, because he knew he was hurting her. But he didn't know how to go back. He was afraid of the intensity of what he felt, afraid of not knowing how to be gentle, afraid that if he touched her, he might break her. It was then that Laura's past returned. On a cold, foggy morning, a wagon stopped at the farm gate. A thin man in a dark suit and hat stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase. He knocked on the door with authority. Laura answered, her heart already racing before she even saw who it was. "Good morning," the man said, removing his hat. "I'm the county inspector. I'm looking for a woman named Laura Mendez." Laura paled. "That's me." The man opened his briefcase and took out an official paper. "You've been reported for desertion of your home and breach of contract with the Tavares family. From the town of São Roque, they demand your immediate return or compensation for 6 months of service." Laura felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. I didn't desert. I ran away. They treated me like a slave." The inspector raised an eyebrow. "The report states otherwise, and until this matter is resolved, you cannot remain here. You must return or pay the debt." "I don't have money." "Then you'll have to return." It was then that Tomas appeared, coming from the field, his face grim. "What's going on here?" The inspector turned impatient. "This doesn't concern you, sir." "If it's on my property, it does concern me." Laura looked at Tomas, her eyes desperate. "They want to take me back." Tomas felt anger explode in his chest. He took a step forward, his voice low and dangerous. "She's not going anywhere." The inspector crossed his arms. The law isn't above what's right. This woman works for me now, and if anyone owes her, it's those Tavares for everything they did." The inspector sighed, impatient. "If you wish to interfere, you must present proof or assume the debt. Otherwise, she returns with me today." Tomas fell silent, his mind working fast. He looked at Laura, pale, trembling, her eyes full of tears, and made the most important decision of his life. "How much is the debt?" 100,000 reis. It was a fortune, almost everything Tomas had saved. "I'll pay it." Laura's eyes widened. "Tomas, no!" But he was already heading inside, returning with the money, counting the bills in front of the inspector. "Here, it's paid. Now get off my land." The inspector took the money, checked it, stamped a receipt, and handed it to Tomas. "Done. She's free." He left, leaving the two in silence. Laura looked at Tomas, incredulous, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you do that?" Tomas put the receipt in his pocket, avoiding her gaze, because it was the right thing to do. He turned to leave, but Laura grabbed his arm. "No, don't leave again. I need to know. I need to understand what's happening." Tomas stopped, his breathing heavy. He remained silent for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke, low, emotional, truthful. "I'm scared, Laura. Scared of hurting you, scared of not knowing how to be gentle, scared of what I feel for you." Laura let out a sob. "And you think I'm not scared? I never knew how to be loved, Tomas. I never knew if I was worth anything. But you made me believe I could be." They looked at each other finally, two broken hearts trying to heal. And Tomas, for the first time, let his guard down. After the inspector left, Tomas and Laura stood on the porch, the silence heavy between them. The cool morning air carried the scent of damp earth and distant smoke. Laura wiped her tears with the back of her hand, trying to regain her composure. Tomas stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I'll pay you back," Laura said, her voice firm despite its tremor. "Every cent. I'll work as much as it takes." Tomas shook his head. "You don't have to." "I do. I can't be indebted to you like this." He turned to her, his eyes tired but determined. "You owe me nothing, Laura. That money bought your freedom, and freedom has no price." Laura felt her chest tighten, She took a hesitant step toward him. "Then what do I do now? Stay here as your hired hand for the rest of my life, or leave and try to start over alone somewhere else?" The question hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Tomas took a deep breath. He knew he had a choice to make. He could let her go, protecting them both from the pain love might bring. Or he could take a risk everything, risk his heart, risk being happy again. "Or you stay as my wife," he said, low and direct. Laura's eyes widened. "What?" Tomas moved closer, slowly, until he was a step away from her. "Marry me, Laura, not out of obligation, not out of debt, but because I want to, because you've made me feel alive again, because I don't want to wake up alone in this house anymore." Laura felt her legs grow weak. She leaned against the porch post, her heart pounding. "Tomas, I don't know how to be a wife. I don't know how to be anything other than what I've always been." He cupped her face in his hands, gently, as if holding something precious. "Then we'll learn together. I don't know how to love someone anymore either, Laura. It's been so long. But I want to try with you, if you want to." Laura closed her eyes, tears streaming between his fingers. "What if I'm not enough? You already are." And for the first time since they'd met, Tomas pulled her close and held her, tight, protective, sincere. Laura sank into his embrace, sobbing softly, letting herself be held, cared for, loved. When they separated, she looked at him, her eyes red but shining. "Yes, I'll marry you." And Tomas smiled, a wide, genuine smile that lit up his tired face. "Then let's do this the right way." In the days that followed, Tomas and Laura planned a simple wedding. There was no money for a party, no family to invite, but there was the village priest, 2 witnesses, and a sincere promise. Tomas went into town to buy a modest dress for Laura, white, simple but beautiful. She tried it on alone in her room, looking at herself in the small, cracked mirror. And for the first time, she saw herself as something more than a burden. On the wedding day, the church was empty except for the priest and the village doctor and his wife, who agreed to be witnesses. Laura walked down the aisle, arm in arm with Tomas, no music, no flowers, but with a heart full. The priest performed a short, heartfelt ceremony. When he asked for their vows, Tomas held Laura's hands and said, his voice deep and moved, "I promise to protect you, to respect you, and to give you a home, always." Laura, her voice trembling, replied, "I promise to care for you, to stand by you, and to make this house a home, always." And when the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," Tomas hesitated just for an instant before leaning down and kissing her tenderly. It was a simple kiss, but charged with promise. As they left the church, they found a few villagers waiting at the door, including some of the same people who had gossiped about Laura weeks ago. But now, many offered shy greetings, and Laura, holding Tomas's hand tightly, felt for the first time that she belonged somewhere. That night, back at the farm, Laura prepared a simple dinner. They ate by candlelight, talking softly, laughing sometimes. And when they went to sleep, for the first time in the same room, Laura lay beside Tomas, her heart racing but without fear. He pulled her close, carefully enveloping her, and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a reason to live again." And Laura, nestled in his arms, whispered back, "Thank you for teaching me that I was worth it." And there, in the gentle darkness of the farm, 2 broken hearts finally began to heal. The peace of their marriage lasted a little over 2 weeks. Laura and Tomas were learning to live together, sharing a bed, sharing dreams, sharing comfortable silences. She had finished the patchwork quilt and draped it over the double bed, a symbol of all they had built together. But the past, as it always does, came back to collect its due. It was a grey afternoon, with heavy clouds gathering on the horizon, when a second wagon stopped at the gate. This time, it wasn't the inspector, It was Mrs. Tavares herself, accompanied by a lawyer and two hired hands. Laura was in the yard picking vegetables when she heard the voices. She stood up slowly, her blood chilling. Mrs. Tavares was a stout woman dressed in dark clothing, her expression hard. She pointed a thin finger at Laura. "There she is, the ungrateful wretch who ran off after everything I did for her." Tomas emerged from the house, his face grim. "The debt has been paid. You have nothing more to claim here." Mrs. Tavares let out a cold laugh. "Paid? With stolen money, perhaps? This woman is a liar, a tramp, and I've come to collect what is rightfully mine." Laura felt shame burn through her, but before she could respond, Tomas stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Be careful what you say about my wife." The woman's eyes widened in disbelief. "Wife? You married this? Finish that sentence and I guarantee Mrs. Tavares will be dragged out of here," Tomas said, his eyes as cold as ice. The lawyer, nervous, tried to intervene. "Sir, Mrs. Tavares is merely exercising her rights. There are witnesses that the girl ran away without warning and—" "Witnesses?" Tomas crossed his arms. "Then bring those witnesses here. I have witnesses too. The doctor who examined my wife when she arrived here, malnourished and with rope marks on her wrists. The priest who married us and can attest to her character. And this whole town, which knows I'm a man of my word." Mrs. Tavares paled. "Rope marks? I would never." "You treated her like a slave," Tomas cut in firm. "And now you want to pretend you're the victim, but it's over. Laura is my wife. She's free, and you will never lay a hand on her again." Heavy silence fell. The lawyer nervously shuffled his papers. Mrs. Tavares, realizing she'd lost, huffed in anger. "This isn't over. You'll leave," Tomas said, opening the gate. "Now." And trembling with rage, but with no other option, Mrs. Tavares climbed into the wagon and departed, followed by the lawyer and his goons. Laura let out the breath she'd been holding, her legs wobbly. Tomas turned to her, his eyes still dark with contained anger. "Are you okay?" She nodded, but tears were already streaming down her face. "I'll never escape the past, will I? There will always be someone trying to drag me back." Tomas cupped her face, firm. "No, because now you have someone who will fight for you. Always." And he hugged her close. As the cold wind began to blow and the first drops of rain fell from the sky, the storm broke with violence, lightning tearing the sky, thunder shaking the house, rain hammering the roof. Tomas and Laura took refuge in the living room, lit the lantern, and sat side by side listening to nature's fury outside. "Are you scared?" Tomas asked. Laura shook her head. "No, not when you're here." He smiled, tired, and pulled her closer. And there, as the storm raged, they remained steadfast, together, whole, unbreakable. For they had learned that no matter how strong the tempest, true love always finds a way to endure. When the rain finally passed, leaving the air clean and the scent of wet earth, Laura looked out the window and saw the rainbow on the horizon. And she knew, deep in her soul, that the worst was over, that now, finally, she could live. 6 months later, the São Sebastião ranch was transformed. Not in structure. The walls were still the same, the roof still creaked in the wind, the wooden gate still needed mending. But there was life there now. There was laughter, music, the smell of fresh bread wafting from the kitchen every morning. Laura woke early, but no longer with fear. She woke with purpose. She made coffee, tended the garden, which now overflowed with tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, and sang as she worked. The flowers she had planted months ago bloomed vibrantly. White daisies, red carnations, pansies in shades of purple and yellow. Tomas still worked hard, but he came home in the mid-afternoon. He'd sit on the porch with Laura, drink coffee, and talk about his day. And he'd smile, that smile she had come to love, wide and genuine, that lit up his sun-weathered face. The blue patchwork quilt was spread over the double bed, each piece telling a story. The fabric Laura had found under the jabuticaba tree, scraps from her wedding dress, a piece of Tomas's old shirt. It was simple, but it was theirs. One sunny Sunday, they had visitors. The town priest appeared accompanied by a little girl, no more than 4 years old, with big, frightened eyes. "Good morning," the priest said, tipping his hat. "Sorry to bother you, but I need some help. This is little Anna. Her parents died in the epidemic last month, and there's no one to care for her. I thought of you." Laura's eyes widened. She looked at the girl. Thin, dirty, trembling with fear, and her heart ached. "We don't have experience with children, Father," Tomas said, hesitant. "I know, but you have something more important. A home, and this girl needs one." Laura knelt before the child, slowly extending her hand. "Hi, Anna. I'm Laura. Want to come inside and have something to eat?" The girl looked at her with suspicion, but then, slowly, she took the outstretched hand. Tomas and Laura exchanged a look, and without needing words, they knew the answer was yes. Anna stayed, and with her, the house gained even more life. Laura taught her to plant, to cook, to sew. Tomas made her a rag doll, clumsy but full of affection, and little by little, the girl began to smile, to play, to call Laura Mom and Tomas Dad. One night, as Anna slept in the next room, Laura and Tomas lay in bed, the patchwork quilt over them. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Laura asked softly. Tomas pulled her closer. "I don't know, but I'm trying, and I think that's what matters." Laura smiled, snuggling into his chest. "Thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me that I can be loved, for giving me a home, for giving me a family." Tomas kissed the top of her head, moved. "Thank you for reminding me that living is worthwhile." Outside, the wind blew gently through the fields. The jabuticaba tree, where Laura had found the blue fabric, was laden with fruit. The garden flourished, the cattle grazed peacefully, and the ranch, which had once been just land and labor, was now a home. Laura and Tomas had learned, through pain and healing, that love is not a technique. It's not something learned from books or taught in lessons. Love is an encounter of tired souls who finally find rest. It is care, it is patience, it is a daily choice. And there, on that remote country ranch, 2 broken hearts had healed, not alone but together, because starting over is the greatest act of courage there is. And they had started over. The next morning, Laura woke early and went out to the orchard. She stopped before the jabuticaba tree, touched its rough trunk, and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered to the tree, as if it could hear. And perhaps it could, because there was something sacred about this land, this place where deep roots had grown, not just in the earth, but in the heart. Tomas appeared behind her, wrapped his arms around her, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "That this is home," Laura replied simply. And Tomas, moved, whispered, "Now it's home." And so they stood, embraced under the jabuticaba tree, as the golden sun rose over the fields, and Anna ran barefoot through the grass, laughing, an unlikely but true family. A family that had learned that no matter how broken the heart, there is always hope for a new beginning. There is always hope for love. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day. And you, what would you do in Laura and Tomas's place? Leave your comment and share this story with someone special.